Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to Open Classroom. I'm Janet Gillow, Director of Professional Development for the Brown School, and so happy to have you with us. Open Classroom began back in late March when we could no longer gather physically at the school, but the Brown School has always been committed to gathering community to learn from each other and for conversation. And through this venue, we've offered a range of programming. So to that end, before we get started today, I just wanted to share we have another program tomorrow. This will give you a sense of the range of topics that we tackle. We have Meg Krejci joining us. She's an employee wellness consultant with the university, and she's going to be sharing a program on mindfulness to manage student stress. Very timely as we're welcoming our Washington University undergraduates back on campus today. So if you haven't signed up for that program and you're interested, that along with about 10 other things that we have going on are available on our website, and we certainly do welcome you back. As members of the audience, you are muted, your camera is disabled, today's program is being recorded, but we certainly want to encourage you to use the chat function of the Zoom webinar. That's how you can say hello, pose a question, make a comment. So please do make use of that. You can send comments in either to the panel or something that you're sharing to the full audience. One of the things that's been great for me about Open Classroom is the opportunity to work with colleagues from across the school, as well as leading voices in the community. And today's program is no exception. Our program today is co-sponsored by Homegrown St. Louis and also the Clark Fox Policy Institute. We're grateful for their support in making this possible. And now to kick off today's program, the Shape the Future of St. Louis in the region, social justice in the U.S. Census, I'm happy to be joined by my co-host, my colleague and friend, Cynthia Williams.
Thank you, Janet, and our sponsors, and welcome to our panelists and audience, and thank you for joining us this afternoon. As required by the United States Constitution, the U.S. Census has been conducted every 10 years since 1790. Census 2020 is the 24th United States Census. This census is unique in that it's the first U.S. Census to offer options to respond online, by phone, or in paper form as in previous decades. All persons in the United States, age 18 and older, are legally obligated to answer census questions and to do so truthfully. Personally identifiable information is private, and the Census Bureau itself promises to never release it. However, the National Archives and Record Administration could release the original census returns in 2092. That is, if the 72-year-old rule is not changed before then. The next 14 days are critical to get Missouri residents counted, and we are grateful to have Dr. Sean Joe, Valerie Patton, Alice Rankin, and Charles Bryson to help us to sift through what's at stake for the region. Janet, I'm going to turn it over to you.
Sure. So if you've joined us before for Open Classroom, we sometimes do lectures, we sometimes do panels, and today's the first time we're doing both. So as Cynthia mentioned, we have a wonderful panel of discussants that have expertise about the census from a variety of perspectives, leaders in our community. But before we turn questions over to a full group discussion, Dr. Sean Joe is going to offer some background context for us. Dr. Joe is the Benjamin E. Youngdahl Professor of Social Development at the Brown School. He's a nationally recognized authority on suicidal behavior among Black Americans and is expanding the evidence base for effective practice with Black boys and young men. He's the founder of the Race and Opportunity Lab, which works to reduce inequality as adolescents transition into adulthood. And an important part of that work is the Homegrown St. Louis project, which is a capacity building intervention to enhance upward mobility opportunities and health of Black males ages 12 to 29 in the St. Louis region. So here to provide context for today's conversation, please welcome Dr. Sean Joe.
Well, thank you, Janet. Thank you, Cynthia, for organizing this Open Classroom. I'm just honored to be joined in this panel of esteemed St. Louisians who are going to really help us to really focus this conversation. So what I thought I would do is just set up the context. The discussion about the census in the context of a pandemic poses a really interesting challenge, but also a rare opportunity for us as a nation. As Americans were really preoccupied with just trying to stay alive and be healthy, at the same time, we had the civic responsibility to be counted as all residents of this country. So the census is not a citizen task, it's a resident task. That means every household, every person in the country needs to be counted. So always aware of how context mattered. As we were doing our work, and it's like everyone else, we were trying to transition, first trying to make sure that we're safe because there was so much unknown about the risk of COVID-19 and how we can be safe. But at the same time, it emerged for me that I knew the census was important. People have been planning around the census for a long time, but it became pretty clear that there was a rare window that we have because the country had to be sequestered. There was an effort to keep people at home. And then with the advent of this new technology to allow online census completion, that presented a rare opportunity. So let me see if I can share my screen. Whether it's successful or unsuccessful, I think we should still be able to have a wonderful conversation. You saw Ms. Williams, she just had to pause for a second because she's hoping it's going to be successful. So my attempt to share will happen now, so please let me know if it is occurring. I hope you can still see it as a presentation. If not, Ms. Williams, are we able to see it as a presentation?
No, sir. It's in edit mode, but
it's in edit mode. But
we're all good.
We're gonna go ahead and make this happen. So let me try to keep the sharing going. Try one more time.
Okay. Very good, sir.
Well, there it is. Thank you very much. So the main thing is that, you know, as I was beginning to have conversations with others who've been organizing around the census for a long time, it became clear that we were losing a rare opportunity during the beginning of the pandemic. And we thought it was critically important that some effort be launched to try to take, although people were trying to figure out how to eat, how to do things, how to work, it was important that we take this opportunity to really try to get the census done during this time, because it was pretty clear that the online option was the first time many people were able to complete the census on their own in a very quick and an efficient way. So we didn't have to rely on receiving a mail ballot, but people can do it over the phone, using their tablets, using their computers. And that presented a rare opportunities for Black Americans to take the opportunities to take this action, this one important social action, to complete the census, because it matters for so much. I mean, the census is one of those rare civic duties that impacts us for at least 11 years after completing it, because it sets the table. It helps us to allocate federal dollars based on how people are counted and where they are counted. So the census is critically important. And for me, it was particularly important with my team as we're thinking about what impacts Black youth. It was important because we realized that this was the first time in a long time, I'm talking not since slavery, that it was uniquely important and uniquely opportune that every Black household could be counted. And I have to refer to slavery for a variety of reasons, because that's the last time that I felt many in the nation who lead the nation was really concerned and interested in making sure Blacks were counted. Now, then they were interested for their own immoral economic self-interest. They didn't want to miss any Black being counted, particularly if you were in southern states. So now we come hundreds of years later, and now we're still struggling, but now not as many people are interested in Black bodies being counted. So now we have what we call hard to reach groups. So anyway, that sort of analysis made it clear to me that we had a unique chance, and it was unique because we can get it counted. So what does that mean for St. Louis? So we just thought it was critically important that there was a whole lot of challenges going on and online, and people were trying to make sense of the craziness that is the pandemic and the high level of risk and the grief people were experiencing. So we just thought it would be uniquely to start talking with other St. Louisians who's organizing around this to say, St. Louis needs a challenge, because in 2010, St. Louis City only got about close to 50% of its federally available dollars. That means only 50% of St. Louis was fully counted in the city. In the county, that number was at 70%. That means a third of our dollars at the federal level for the county was sent to some other parts of this country. It doesn't come to Missouri, it just is sent to another part of the country. And then that means 50% of St. Louis's federally allocated dollars were not sent to St. Louis City, it was sent elsewhere. So the city had to use those resources, the county had to use those resources over the last 11 years. And we know the city and county need more. So these local actions around the census is always have implications for the nation. And it's critically important that these regions, particularly low resource settings or city and urban spaces that are strapped for dollars, or rural areas that are strapped for dollars, that if you don't get your residents fully counted, you are really defunding yourself. You're giving back money to the federal government to say, use elsewhere. And really in this unique moment, we had the chance to self-determine that because we had online options, we had telephone options, and we had mail-in options. And the window was critically important because, and again, why did I call it a window? Because the federal government shut down all field operations because we were in a pandemic. So really, we had this time between March and July for just American citizens to take it on their own to complete the census at home. And that was our strategy. We said, well, there's a lot you can do. You can't go out, but what you can do is encourage every family member just to take it upon themselves to make sure that their household is fully counted. So to complete the count at home strategy became what's critically important for us in Homegrown, and with the coalition, we call it St. Louis 2020 Challenge Census Coalition, to really begin to move this. Now, why this is important for an academic to be thinking about? Because as an academic who really focused his life work on how do we support the healthy transition of Black adolescents to young adulthood, I know that every dollar matters. When we know that if the city has more resources, the county has more resources, there are more they can do for the citizens. And if they don't have that, then we struggle to figure out how to make tough decisions to cut one thing in order to pay for another thing. So it was critically important to me that I did all I can with my team at the Race and Opportunity Lab to make sure that we support any effort to make sure during that March to July period, as many people are counted. So we really wanted to take a look at where we were at, and then we realized we set the goal, if St. Louisans, city and county, was able to self-respond and we get our rates up to about 70 or 80%, that will be doing something remarkable. Because then you only leave the census field operations to come in to do 30 or 20% of the work. And if that's the case, we can get close to being 100% fully counted. So that was the hypothesis, that was the goal. But the question was, how do you get others to focus on it during a time of pandemic and severe need that people were trying to address? So we know, and we started this work with this coalition, paying attention to what the census response rates were, the self-response rates, looking at St. Louis County and different cities. And as we expected, where Black and Brown live tends to be the most undercounted. But we wanted to have data that we can use to help groups to say, how do you focus your energy and think about innovative ways to reach individuals though we cannot go out? How can you do it over Facebook and social media? So all these sort of strategies, working with a lot of different organizations, first with the fraternities and sororities. This was a collective effort to try to get that self-response rate out. And I was appreciative of the Brown School who helped us create just different social media tools so that we can get things out, and to be working with a lot of different groups of people. So we knew neighborhoods like Kinlock and Beverly, all these areas have low response rates, and we were trying really hard to get out the message out so people complete the count at home. And then similarly in the city of St. Louis, again, we knew different neighborhoods and zip codes. The same neighborhoods and zip codes, they had a 25%, a 20%, a 35% census response. That means field operations plus mail in 2010, we knew we had to try to get those rates up higher. And the higher we could make it in the self-response, meaning by phone, by doing it online, made it much more easier for the census team when they would relaunch, which they did roughly about almost coming up on a month, I would say 3.5 weeks ago. They have been out again doing that direct door knocking and what they call the non-response follow-up. So let me give you a little context here. So we had this window from March to July to really take it into our own hands to complete the census. Every household had a chance to do that by telephone and by going to mycensus.gov to be able to do it online. And by telephone, let me give that number at 844-330-2020, 844-330-2020, because again, the census does not end until September 30th. So the push was to try to get this information out to many citizens as possible, and that has been the response in our region, where people are really trying to make sure people take this in their own hands. So the traditional way this is done is that there are those who try to go out and do a lot of education. There are a lot of resources given to this work. I was particularly challenged, and I was challenged initially because I understood that the budget for our state was roughly about $500,000 for what amounts to billions of dollars of federal aid. So anyway, but that was the situation. We couldn't change that. What we could change is whether or not each citizen had a chance to know about the importance of the census and how the census impact almost everything that they experience. It impacts the quality of your sidewalk. It impacts the quality of opportunities for their children. That means impact all the public schools, the books they get, whether or not they're new or old, that impacts their ability, even in a pandemic, whether or not they had Chromebooks, whether or not they have access to hotspots, whether or not the uniforms that children might play in for sports. It impacts their access to SNAP or in my days called food stamps. It impacts a lot of the federal programs that are out there that supports our housing. So it was critically important that we made this stride. So I can go through, and I wanted to share with you some of the grassroots approaches that we took to this, but we had to join in writing op-eds as others wrote op-eds and sending communication. But one of the things we started was the Census Challenge. And we said, well, first, if we can get the Brown School, we can get our own institutions to step up at home. That means that if the Brown School can make sure its faculty, staff, and students were fully counted in the census, then we have a good leg to stand on to challenge other schools, other units on campus, other community groups and partners that we work with to say, I know you want to do a lot, but can you first make sure that your household is fully counted? And we thought that was a very, very important strategy and easy for anyone to complete versus trying to get the world or the whole region to be counted. Take care of your organization first. And we had a lot of groups, a lot of fraternities stepped up to that challenge, and other nonprofits began to step up to that challenge, and we appreciate that work. And I think we're beginning to make a difference. So we've been doing this for a while. So now that we know the census is going to end on September 30th, which is a month earlier than what was originally revised, which is supposed to end in October. But again, regardless of what the federal government did, it was critically important that we as citizens just respond as best we can, knowing that we can probably file lawsuits and complain and say that wasn't right. But the one thing we have to do is to take action to make sure that every household is finishing the census. And it matters not just for St. Louisians in Black communities, but it really impacts the region, because in the end, it's the region that pays the price. It's the region that will have to make up those shortcomings in dollars. It's always the region. So it's critically important that the census is filled out in Ladue as it's filled out in Kinloch. It's critically important that Wells Goodfellow area's census is filled out as it's filled out right here off of Clayton Road. So it matters quite a deal to everyone. Otherwise, we all will have to pay the price and figure out a way to meet that need. if we don't get our full share of federally allocated dollars. And what does that mean? So roughly for every person, the census allocates about, say, $1,300 to close to $1,400 per person in the household every year for the next 10 years. And then the census also then informs how we think about representational government. So it's not just money, it's also power and representation, our vote. So based on the census, they reorganize how political districts, congressional districts are set up. It's set up by the density, how many people are in that area. And in 2010, St. Louis region lost a congressional seat because based on the census, they made a district larger, which means we lost a congressional seat. So you're losing political representation. You're losing the ability to help to set the agenda for the nation if we're not fully counted. So again, it's access to direct resources, but also it's political representation. So how your state representatives are divided in terms of how many you might have will be dependent on the census, because everyone uses the census for calculations. Businesses, which I hope Ms. Patton will get into, use the census for calculations to be able to try to figure out whether or not there's a market there. And we can get more into that. So in our last push here, we have 2.4 weeks, so basically 2 weeks left to really do our best to move this coalition forward and to try to meet this need. It's critically important to us as a school because we don't just exist in St. Louis. The idea is that you always should be thinking about what are you doing for the region that your university or school is based in, because you're part of that ecosystem, you're part of that experience. I think I'm going over too much. So our push right now is to try to do as much as we can, working with the census staff and teams and our coalition partners to do mobile assistance strategies, to do door knocking as best we can with PPE and different organizations. We're going to be going out every Saturday now to try to make sure we do the last big push. And really right now, if you look at the data, it is those areas that tend to be undercounted that we have to make sure we reach. And the Census Bureau is out there. They're now doing non-response follow-up and trying to move to ensure that everyone is fully counted. So I wanted to make sure I highlight some of those partners, those faith communities that were involved in this, trying to reach their congregation on a weekly basis. School districts are now engaged where they're trying to send communication to parents. Thanks Jennings, thanks U City District, as well as St. Louis Public Schools. But we have 2 weeks left. And I think we can do something remarkable and to make sure that our people are fully counted. So there's a little bit more I would want to say, but let me stop there because I know we have others here on this panel. And where we stand right now, folks, is that we're not totally clear, but we're trying to get, maybe my colleagues, this is my question, might know. Because I know for Missouri, our self-response rate overall is 65%. The non-response follow-up is roughly, they say that means of the 35% that was left, they said that 29% of that is completed. So somehow the state is showing, at least on the census document, that 99% of Missouri is enumerated. That would be great, but I would love someone to give me a better sense of where we think the city and the county is with both self-response and non-response follow-up. The numbers used to be very clear, folks, when it was just us, individuals responding. But now the government is involved. I just don't know how much of the work that was left did they complete. It would be great to get that information. So with that, I'll stop.
Thank you, Dr. Joe. Mr. Bryson, are you able to answer Dr. Joe's question? Mr. Bryson, can you hear me? Can you hear me, Mr. Bryson? Okay, Janet, will you go on to your next question, please?
Sure thing. So I think at this point we would like to ask our panelists to please introduce themselves a bit. Each of you is a leader in this community with an organizational affiliation and possibly a current project related to the census. So perhaps Valerie, would you go first, saying hello to the audience?
My pleasure. Good afternoon. I'm humbled, honored, and blessed to have the opportunity to be with you this afternoon. I am a senior vice president at the St. Louis Regional Chamber. What I do there is multicultural leadership development, inclusive business solutions, talent attraction and retention, workforce development strategies, grant and foundation strategies, and of course, championing equity, inclusion, and diversity. I also adjunct at the Brown School, where I teach social justice and human diversity. And it's imperative that each and every one of us, as we are to vote, we also need to complete our census, because it will impact, as Dr. Joe alluded to, how funds will be allocated within a corporate environment, because they do have corporate social responsibility efforts, and those responsibilities flow into the community, along with where they build, where they expand, where they grow, who they employ, what the employment base is going to look like. So all of those pieces come into play when we talk about the census.
Thank you so much. Alex, will you go next? And I really appreciate that Valerie added her own spin on what's at stake. Why is this important? I know that question has already come into the chat. People eager for talking points to persuade others that this is important.
Sure. So I'm Alex Rankin. I'm the Director of Government Affairs for Missouri Foundation for Health. And I'm also our 2020 census lead. So we became involved in the 2020 census, I think it was the end of 2018, when we sort of realized the real impact that this would have on our state and on our regions, and particularly on the communities that we represent. And so, you know, I'm really happy to be part of this discussion today. I put something in the chat to answer a question that came up. We do have several different types of resources that can be used at this point to help sort of find the right message to resonate with different communities, whether it's, you know, whether it's individuals and families, or whether it's, you know, kind of leaders and stakeholders. But I'm really happy to be a part of this conversation. Dr. Joe, to sort of answer one of the questions that you brought up. So I know that it's been challenging to kind of track the non-response follow-up at a local level. And so there's been a couple of different resources. The Census Bureau does have a resource for counting, or sort of showing how census area offices are doing, but that's such a broad range and region. But I will say that the Census Hard to Count map, which is, I think it's done by a university in New York, it does look like they have some data coming in since self-response or since non-response follow-up. So I will put the link to that in the chat, and it's the type that you can kind of drill down and see.
Thank you for that. And Mr. Bryson, I think we were having some issues with your audio before. I'm wondering whether you were able to hear us and use the microphone now. Okay, you're muted. It sounds like you can hear us.
Yeah, I think you can hear us.
Yeah, I think you can hear us.
There we go.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, thank you so much. If you're able, could you use this moment to introduce yourself, your affiliation, and really anything that you want to say and amplify about, from your perspective, what's at stake with the census?
Thank you. So I'm Charles Bryson, Director of the Civil Rights Enforcement Agency, City of St. Louis. I'm also chair of the Undercounted Committee for the City of St. Louis. And our work is really to try to increase the number of people who are filling out census and however they do it by September 30th. One of the ways they're doing that is we're working with a lot of partners on a grassroots level to add them to help get word out. That includes neighborhood organizations and associations, the community block grant recipients, as well as our board aldermen, our committee men and committee women, and we're just trying to reach out to a wide variety of groups to some degree stay in your lane. If you are in a particular area and you know that area well, we want you to go back to that area and remind people how important it is for the census. If you work senior service center and you have senior service program participants, remind of the impact of not having federal dollars will pay on the services and programs that you are being delivered, being served. If you are the city Parks and Recreation Division, how much federal dollars come from the federal government to serve the programs that you have for young men, women, and their parents. We're asking people to, over the next 2 weeks, to push hard the people that you know, people that respect you, people that need your service and resource, and say, there's a huge, as we talked about earlier, $1,300 per person in the city of St. Louis every year for 10 years. And so that's a huge impact for people not filling out the census. We're also reminding people of the phone number. Sometimes on the north side of St. Louis, people are not using the internet, they're using the phone number. So we're trying to make sure that they do that as well.
Thank you, Mr. Bryson. Sean, I'm going to go back to you for a moment. There's a question in the chat. Can you explain why the southern states made sure that the slaves were counted?
Oh, well, the historical role there is that this is all about representational power. So they just wanted to make sure that they, although they didn't count Africans as one whole person, because the North said that would disadvantage them and there'll be more, they'll get more senator, well, not senators necessarily, but they'll get more congressional leaders in the Congress because they had more people. Because if you count the slaves, you got more people in the South. So although they did not treat them as people, they used them as people when they wanted to. So that's why they wanted to make sure that every slave was counted. Though it's interesting now, you flip it on in the current context, and the South is, is where they don't want as many people. Well, they still want people counted, I should say that, but it's not the same sort of politics and motivations. Let me just say that way.
Thank you. Mr. Bryson, you're at the beginning, the panel, the audience says that they couldn't understand your organization. Would you please tell repeat again the name of your organization?
Sure, it's the Civil Rights Enforcement Agency for the City of St. Louis. We are responsible for the enforcement of fair housing, equal employment opportunity, and public accommodation, as I like to say, from the river to sinker, by federal, state, and local ordinances.
Thank you. And one last question to you, Sean, and then I'm going to turn it over to you, Janet. Sean, the impact of the pandemic, you did mention it in your presentation, but could you talk a little bit more so that the audience might understand that some people are going through a pandemic, others are going through a syndemic, and so the implications of what African Americans have gone through with regard to grieving and bereavement and other losses, job losses. Could you elaborate more on the impact of the pandemic and how it might have impacted response to the census? You're muted, sir.
Initially, my argument was that the pandemic presented an opportunity in the sense that people were at home and there was a lot they can do to fill out the census. That was my original argument. But we know what was competing for their time and interest was those who lost jobs, those who couldn't get their kids to school and now had to homeschool, right? Those who needed food. So the normal needs that people had in responding to the economic as well as the death and illness that was resulting from the pandemic took people's time, rightfully so. But it was also a unique moment for individuals to act with self-determination because of the online way to complete the census and the telephone. So the pandemic had an impact in that way. Also, we be concerned when the non-response follow-up, the field operation went out, people are also going to be a little leery of people coming to their doors. So that natural concern about exposure for disease that you can't see when it comes at you, that can be spread in that way was a concern and still remains a concern. But the great thing right now is that people can still complete the census at home, on their phone, on their tablets, up until September 30th. So they do have time to act on their own, but know that the census government is coming out with strong PPE strategies, because again, it takes 9 to 10 minutes to answer 9 questions. That's really what it is. And the other issues that impacted the census, and it always has, is one, this is not a citizen's question. You don't have to be a citizen. If you're a resident in the United States, you complete this thing. And you want to make sure everybody gets counted because that's $1,300 plus for every single person. And then the last component of this is that people are worried about, well, who's going to use my information? There's not a Supreme Court that could come and pass a law to change it that quickly. Your information is safeguarded for more than 70 years. It's safeguarded that nobody can come and get it. They can't pull it into some court process or any housing or eviction process or anything that you might be concerned about. They cannot come and pull that in. So those are some of the things that impact people's responses.
Thank you for that. And certainly the impact on federal dollars drawn down per person is huge. I want to take this opportunity because we have a couple of experts related to particular sectors to ask first Valerie to comment on economic development, and then Alex to comment on anything related to healthcare access or quality. What you might see specifically in the census beyond the federal drawdown, but impacts to your sectors in our area.
So there are direct correlations between population and the census. So as we look at resource allocation, as we look at the ability for something as simple as tax credits, tax incentives, if you don't have the tax base, you won't, and that's people being counted in the census, then you will not be able to offer more of those. So that comes really into play in the business sector as we look to, as I say, do business attraction, business expansion, business growth. We really, many of those projects are done through tax credits and tax incentives. So that's how we really look at the impact at the end of the day. And then that trickles down into employment. So you don't have, if you don't count people, you can't employ people. So you have to have people to work in these different environments. So at the end of the day, being counted, and to Dr. Joe's point, many people of color do not want to participate in the census because they think it will be a detrimental outcome to them. I'm not going to get my check, or my check is going to be taken away from me, or they're going to take me back across the border that I crossed to get here. So there are a lot of systematic issues that come into play. What I also like to say as we kind of expound on the impact, just think about it. They moved the census date back 30 days. Why is that? That's an economic driver at the end of the day. Only the people that are participating are going to be pretty vigilant and be on top of it. But those people that are working 2 or 3 jobs, you know, just trying to make it, census is not a priority to them. And then you move it back 30 days, and that's time we lose in really being able to get to people, and we move it back 30 days in a pandemic. So that is in and of itself a major blow into the economic engine, and people don't understand the long-term ramifications of what will happen. They won't have representation and a public policy type level. They won't have opportunities for jobs. They won't have new industries coming in. Education funding gets cut, and we already know education is being cut. That's the first thing people cut. So all of those things are direct correlation to the census count.
Yeah, sorry, I was unmuting myself. Yes to everything that Valerie just mentioned about the impact on the economy. When we look at sort of the impact on health, we look beyond just healthcare. We look at social determinants of health, people's ability to thrive in their communities. So, you know, we talked a lot about the census being kind of being the method that determines federal funding. And that goes to hundreds of federal spending programs, some of which are the big ones that Dr. Joe had already mentioned, but, you know, Medicaid funding, children's health insurance funding, food stamps, housing vouchers. I mean, it's over 300 in terms of the programs that benefit communities. And, you know, if we just undercount one person, we're stretching our dollar so thin for needs that we already have. You know, we don't need to stretch it any thinner. We're already doing a good job at that and being resourceful. But, you know, aside from the funding aspect, again, we look at sort of the ability of a community to thrive. And so there are so many different impacts to the local economy, to people being able to access jobs and access opportunity. Not to mention, we believe that representation is important, that building power is important to someone's well-being and health. And so, you know, ensuring that everyone is counted, hopefully, you know, in the right way is really so crucial for people's ability to live well throughout the next 10 years.
Thank you. Dr. Joe and Charles, I'm going to direct this question to you. Dr. Joe, you mentioned that this is a resident count and not a citizenship count. How does that impact immigrants and refugees in our community?
Well, one of the key things is to make sure that they know they should be counted and to try to encourage them to be counted. Because again, the census it says how many people do we have in the United States boundaries? You know, that includes our territories too. So it's not a question that says how many citizens we have in the United States. Mm-hmm. One of the big debates about a year ago, we kind of heard, and some people did hear, that it was an attempt to put a citizenship question on the census, mm-hmm. and what negative impact it would have to make sure that we have a fair and accurate count. So for anyone who's an immigrant, be counted, because the resources that you also might depend on are the same resources that are funded by these federal dollars. And it does directly impact your children. The food, the lunch, the schools, if you're an immigrant in this country. If you're a naturalized citizen, that's fine. Again, it counts the same way for you. Be counted, make sure your family's counted, because again, your tax dollars that flow up to the federal government, you deserve to get that back. Think about it as a table or a pie of allocation. Why separate yourself from money that you should get just by existing, just by saying I'm here? Mm-hmm. So it's critically important that that we do that. And I could, now again, the thing I always respect is saying that families are thinking about a lot, but this is one of those things that we have to act, because it's not a this year decision. It's a every year for the next 10, 11 years. And I always say 11 because when they launch the next census, they still use the data from the previous census until the new census comes in place. So that's a whole nother year before that's in place to do allocation. So that's why I think it's important that citizens, immigrants pay attention to this. Let me say one other group, because it came up in the chat. The other insidious part about this is that if you have any family member who's incarcerated,
Mm-hmm.
the census count them where they are at, not where they are from.
Mm-hmm.
That means if they're in rural prisons, it's those areas that benefit from it. So there's always been a concern that the prison industrial complex was being done in a way that was removing resources from local areas, because those areas, those rural areas that are depending on prisons as the primary job, they're also getting the benefit of warehousing Black and brown bodies, because those areas get those census dollars, not where those people actually are from. So there's a lot to unpack here in terms of equity, and then you bring in the role of systemic racism in this process. So don't let me complicate it even further. My point is, everybody should be counted. College students are counted. Prisoners are counted. But we have to get a fair and accurate count. And it's in the power of every individual to do it. I don't want people to think of some grand group coming out to help you to do. It's in the power of every individual to do it. Every organization to say, make sure your employees, your colleagues are fully counted. Do those things, we're going to get close to doing something remarkable and being close to 100%.
Mr. Bryson, would you like to comment? Thank you, Dr. Joe. Mr. Bryson? Oh, okay.
So
Yes.
I think the issue for us is redistricting. In 2021, the city of St. Louis is supposed to go from 28 wards to 14 wards. And that information of people is based on the 2020 census. Right now, the clear problems is many folks on the north side of the city are not filling out the census. Therefore, they are not technically counted when we look toward redistricting and redrawing in 2021 and the elections, which should happen either that fall or in 2022. So one of the things we are trying to mind those state representatives, those aldermen, those committee people, is we have got to make sure that people on the north side of the city, which are overwhelmingly African-American, are counted in the census. And so we have been making that huge push to every African-American organization we can find. We've been on the street, knocking on doors, leaving door hangers on the north side to remind people we have got an issue that has to be addressed. That is redistricting when we downsize from 28 to 14. And that's going to be crucial because that power, at the end of the day, we're talking really about two things. We're talking about money and we're talking about power. So we want to make sure that the African Americans on the north side get their fair share of power by the census count.
Thank you. I'd like to also comment, we've already named some of the major design changes to the census, how people can respond on phone, on the online, paper form. And also another design change was the multiple languages that has been produced in. There are at least 12 additional languages and information cards, language identification cards that have been provided for non-English speakers. So are there other improvements, panel, that you think could and should be made in the next 10 to 11 years?
I can jump in really quickly. I just think that, it's important that we frame this sort of conversation around, getting people counted for 2020. But I am really worried that, our community will kind of forget about the census after the census happens. And some of these weird nuances where incarcerated people are counted in prisons versus where they're from, I mean, those are advocacy issues. And so we should be highlighting those issues and having conversations with our federal delegation throughout the next 10 years as we plan for 2030 to really make sure that maybe we're not, again, frustrated by the way that some of the operational sort of statistics happen. I also think that, this year is really unique in that we had a pandemic. Hopefully we never have a pandemic again during a census. But, I think it's sort of throwing together a lot of different operations. One that we haven't really talked about is at the end of September is when they do the count of homeless populations, and they focus on transitory locations as well. And so that is a really crucial moment because that population is really likely to go uncounted. And so we want to make sure that, if there are people in the audience that have relationships with those communities or relationships with the service providers of those communities, that they're aware and that they're working with Charles, that they're working with the Census Bureau to try to figure out how do we really get those folks counted, because that's even more complicated. So not necessarily a direct answer to your question, but I did want to highlight those two issues because I think they're both very important.
Thank you.
And I'd like to add, being one that comes from a grassroots type of background, we need to go to the people. So people go to the grocery store. So I think there should be stations set up at grocery stores to gently ask people if they have completed it. If they haven't completed it, then to complete it, just like they sell Girl Scout cookies at the grocery store. So I think we really need to think about, where do people gather? Where are people, going to the churches, though church has been shut down during the pandemic, but people have been going to the pharmacy. People have been going to the grocery store. Those places where people gather, where those people you can very easily have a booth set up and have them do that. It didn't take me 10 minutes to do it. And I did it for myself and for my 86-year-old mother. So I think it's really being more grassroots and going to the people where the people gather.
Let me jump in there, because one of the strongest things I think we can do is exactly what Valerie is saying, is maintain the capacity to reach out to different groups and to launch strategies where you're doing that sort of door-to-door education, you're doing that local outreach to communities. I'm talking about those pharmacies. In New York, I would have said the corner stores, but there's not quite corner stores here in St. Louis. But you understand what I mean. Places where everyday individuals gather and use. But I think if the city and the region has some organization that keep that mobilizing capacity ready to go, it will be needed. It's going to be harder the next time. And it's not because of the pandemic, it's because when you have busy people and busy lives, it's even harder then to get folks to stop and take time to do this. So I said, keep your infrastructure organized, that you can really roll this out. The sooner you do it, the better, because 2030 will be here before you know it. Trust me, it happened with 2020.
Let me jump in, because everybody said some things that are important. Number one is infrastructure. So because of Carla and the work that she did, we've got a relationship now with two different groups. One, Save-A-Lots, and with the League of Women Voters. And hopefully as of maybe tomorrow or Wednesday, we'll be going into Save-A-Lot locations with tablets and hotspots to do things. Number one, I wanted the census first. Right behind the census becomes just during the vote. So hopefully we will be able to get those things done over the next, 2 weeks, days, whatever it is. The second thing is we've had people who have not stepped up to the plate, and I'm not getting ready to out anybody here, but I think as people have thought about the priority, they haven't realized how what the priority is related to the census. And I've seen that. So when I pick up the phone and call people, oh, well, we got plenty of time. We got plenty of time. Well, all of a sudden, October 30th became September 30th, and now everybody's running around. I think you're Dr. Joe, we need to maintain the infrastructure, but we also need to remind people the civics lesson around census. That gets lost, and I would argue that a large share of the people who are not filling out the census were not head households in 2010. And so we've got to figure out a different way to reach them because they didn't get that civics lesson in high school or in college. So we've got to do a lot of work around training people, not just on the need to fill out the census and not just the need to vote, but the whole issue of civics in our community. And I think as we look at ways to do that, that will empower people so that 2030 may take care of itself.
Thank you for that. And this is what always happens. An hour goes by so very quickly when there's so much to talk about and so much at stake. So we have just a few minutes left, but we do have enough time to ask each panelist to send us out with a closing thought, either something that's bringing you hope in this moment, or if it's a call to action that you want to extend to the audience, that's fine too. But Dr. Joe, would you like to go first?
Sure. First of all, lots of things are giving me hope. Not only the members of this panel, but iHeartRadio that has stepped up and they're putting out PSAs every day now leading up to the close. So thank iHeartRadio and others. It's good to have some of the census actual staff, Carl Hill, Emmett, all these folks who are trying to make sure that St. Louis and Missouri is counted. Beyond housing, I want to thank them because again, Action St. Louis, there's a lot of community groups going out now and have been going out to try to make sure people are counted and they know. So I am hopeful because I'm seeing a coalition of St. Louisians trying to reach people where they're at and giving them what they need to try to be fully counted. So with that, I'm hoping that we can come back on October 2nd. We're gonna hold one party to get everybody together to celebrate whatever we have. I know we're going to be better than we were in 2010, and that's victory already.
Valerie, Alex, or Charles?
Well, I'm hopeful that we will get to a count that will not put us in a compromised position. So I'm hopeful that doing grassroots efforts by doing also established efforts will get us to where we need to be. But also, I want to, once again, I think we're preaching to the choir in a lot of respects. I need them to each one, teach one, reach one, and make sure that in your daily conversation, you are encouraging people to complete their census, but also to vote. So that would be my words for closing remarks.
I would say that I'm just whole every day. We do it every day, and hopefully we'll see who we were in 2010, which is 6.7%. We've got a lot of work to do. We have a whole lot of people now who understand the need to come together around this. We've got a short period of time, but hopefully we'll be able to get it done.
Yes, and I would probably echo what everyone else is saying, but make sure your family, your friends, parents, neighbors, your organizations. I mean, like I'm probably annoyed all my coworkers to no end at this point, but you have a network, so please activate your network and make sure that they are counted. And I think it's so very important, not just for the region, but for the state. But I am really hopeful because the state is doing a lot better than we did in 2010. So I'm really hoping that it translates to the region as well. So thank you all for your hard work.
And I'd like to extend my thank you to the panel. Thank you so much for the information that you shared with the audience and with us as well. I hope that you enjoy the rest of your week. Dr. Joe, I am encouraged because when you move a certain way, uh, President Obama's over on one of your shoulders, and it gives me hope when I see him. So if you kind of move to the yes, he comes up a certain way. Yes, there he was. That's my hope. I remember, and we can do this. So with having said that, Janet, thank you so much. Also, panel, have a good rest of the week.
Thank you all. Thank you.